Most people step over strangers in distress. It's a statistical fact. When someone collapses on a busy sidewalk, 73% of pedestrians will cross to the other side rather than get involved. They'll check their phones, adjust their earbuds, quicken their pace. Self-preservation trumps compassion every single time. On a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in downtown Chicago, Sophia Moretti did none of those things. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since morning, turning the autumn drizzle into something that bit at exposed skin and made the streets gleam like black glass under the neon signs. Sophia's polyester uniform clung to her shoulders, the fabric cheap enough that it never quite dried, never quite warmed her. The name tag pinned crookedly to her chest read Sophia in faded black letters, though most customers never bothered to look that close. She was invisible in the way that service workers always are, a pair of hands that delivered food, refilled coffee, cleared tables, nothing more. She'd been pulling double shifts at Mickey's Diner for 3 weeks straight, the kind of establishment where the coffee was burnt by 9 a.m. and the fluorescent lights hummed with a frequency that made your teeth ache. Her manager, Rick, was the sort of man who counted napkins like they were gold bars and docked pay for every bathroom break that lasted longer than 4 minutes. The kind of place where showing up meant survival, and survival meant staying invisible. Sophia was wiping down the last table of her 14-hour shift when she heard it through the rain-streaked window. Not quite a scream, not quite a groan. Something in between that made every nerve in her body snap to attention. An elderly woman had collapsed on the sidewalk directly in front of the diner. She was well dressed, the kind of elegant that spoke of money and careful attention to detail. Cashmere coat, real leather handbag, shoes that probably cost more than Sophia's monthly rent. But dignity doesn't cushion a fall on wet concrete. The woman lay crumpled against a newspaper stand, one hand pressed to her chest, the other reaching helplessly toward the stream of people who stepped around her like she was debris. Sophia watched a businessman in a $1,000 suit check his Rolex and cross the street rather than stop. A woman with a designer purse pulled out her phone to film rather than help. A teenager with expensive headphones stepped directly over the woman's outstretched arm without breaking his stride. "Jesus Christ, Sophia, what are you standing there for?" Rick's voice cut through her concentration like a rusty knife. "Table 6 needs their check, and the coffee station looks like a bomb went off. You think I'm paying you to stare out windows?" The elderly woman's breathing was becoming more laboured. Sophia could see it even from 20 feet away. The shallow, desperate gasps of someone whose body was failing them in the middle of a crowd that had already written her off. Sophia didn't think. Thinking was a luxury she couldn't afford. She dropped the dish rag on table 9, ignored Rick's string of profanity behind her, and pushed through the diner's glass door into the October rain. Her sneakers, held together with electrical tape and stubbornness, splashed through puddles that soaked through to her socks within 3 steps. The cold hit her like a slap, but she kept moving. "Ma'am?" Sophia knelt beside the woman, her knees immediately soaking through her thin uniform pants. The concrete was like ice, jagged with pieces of broken glass and cigarette butts. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were a sharp grey, the kind of intelligent eyes that had seen decades of the world and weren't impressed by most of it. But now they were clouded with pain and something that might have been fear. "I can't," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the traffic. "My chest." Sophia's hands moved without conscious thought, slipping under the woman's shoulders to support her weight. The cashmere coat was soaked through now, but beneath it Sophia could feel how frail the woman had become. Bird bones wrapped in expensive fabric. She was probably someone's grandmother, someone's mother, someone who mattered to people with power and money and influence. But right now she was just a human being who needed help. "It's okay," Sophia murmured, using the same tone she'd used to comfort crying children in foster homes, the same steady calm that had gotten her through 15 years of other people's emergencies. I've got you. You're not alone." She managed to get the woman into a sitting position, back against the newspaper stand, head tilted up to help her breathing. Sophia stripped off her own jacket, a threadbare thing she'd bought at Goodwill 2 years ago, and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. The rain immediately began soaking through Sophia's uniform shirt, but the woman's shivering had started to ease. "Should I call 911?" Sophia asked, already reaching for the phone she could barely afford to keep activated. The woman's fingers closed around Sophia's wrist with surprising strength. "No hospitals," she said firmly. "Please, just help me to my car." Sophia glanced around, looking for a vehicle that might belong to someone wearing a coat worth more than Sophia's annual income. Across the street, beneath the orange glow of a streetlight, sat a black Mercedes-Benz that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian. Armoured windows, chrome that caught the light like scattered diamonds, and a presence that made the other cars on the street look like toys. "That one?" Sophia asked. The woman nodded, and Sophia helped her to her feet with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to be gentle with fragile things. They made their way across the street together, Sophia's arm wrapped securely around the woman's waist, taking most of her weight. The rain had turned vicious now, driving horizontally on a wind that tasted like winter. As they reached the Mercedes, Sophia noticed the windows were tinted so dark they might as well have been painted black. She couldn't see inside, couldn't tell if anyone was waiting. For a moment, she wondered if she was making a mistake, if helping this woman was about to become the kind of decision that changed everything. The passenger door opened from the inside. "Isabella." The voice that emerged from the car's interior was male, deep, and carried the kind of authority that made Sophia's spine straighten instinctively. What happened? Sophia couldn't see the speaker, but she could feel him watching her, assessing. The weight of his attention was like standing in front of a predator that was deciding whether you were prey or simply irrelevant. "This girl," the woman, Isabella, said softly, "she helped me. Everyone else walked by, but she stopped." Sophia helped Isabella into the passenger seat, making sure the cashmere coat was tucked around her legs and that her seatbelt was secure. Basic human decency, the kind of thing her foster mother had taught her before the state took that placement away too. As she straightened up, preparing to return to the diner and face whatever punishment Rick had cooked up for her unauthorized absence, Isabella's hand caught hers again. "What's your name, dear?" "Sophia," she replied automatically. "Sophia Moretti." Isabella smiled, and for a moment the exhaustion and pain disappeared from her features. "Sophia, that means wisdom, doesn't it?" I don't know, Mum. I should probably get back to work." "Thank you, Sophia," Isabella said, and something in her tone suggested the words carried more weight than simple gratitude. "I won't forget this." The car door closed with the solid thunk of German engineering and bulletproof glass. Sophia watched the Mercedes pull away from the curb, its taillights disappearing into the maze of downtown traffic like it had never been there at all. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, rain streaming down her face and soaking through her shirt to the skin beneath. Her jacket was gone, her sneakers were ruined, and Rick was probably calculating exactly how much of her paycheck he could legally steal for abandoning her post. But the elderly woman was safe. Isabella was safe. Sometimes that had to be enough. Sophia turned back toward Mickey's diner, where the harsh fluorescent lights cut through the rain like judgment, and walked toward whatever consequences were waiting for her. Behind her, on the opposite side of the street, a second car had been idling with its lights off. The driver had watched every second of what had just happened. He'd seen Sophia risk her job, her pay, her dry clothes, and her safety for a stranger who couldn't possibly do anything for her in return. And in that moment, Dante Romano realized he'd found something he'd thought no longer existed in his world, someone who was genuinely good. The violence erupted in the Romano estate kitchen at 3:17 a.m. shattering the post-memorial dinner quiet with the sound of splintering wood and muffled gunshots that echoed through the marble halls like thunder. Sophia woke instantly, her body responding to danger before her mind had fully processed what she was hearing. The panic button Dante had given her weeks ago was on the nightstand beside her bed in the guest wing, but the sounds were coming from the opposite direction, toward the main house where Isabella slept. Sophia didn't reach for the button. She reached for the chef's knife she'd started keeping beside her bed after the ballroom shooting, a 10-inch piece of German steel that Maria had taught her to sharpen to razor precision. The hallway was dark except for the emergency lighting that had activated automatically, casting everything in an eerie red glow that made shadows dance like living things. Sophia moved toward the main house with the silent steps she'd learned during years of navigating foster homes where making noise after lights out meant punishment. She could hear voices now, harsh, unfamiliar accents that definitely didn't belong to any of the estate's security team. Marco Torino had brought the fight to their home, and from the sound of it, he'd brought enough men to make it count. Sophia reached the junction where the guest wing connected to the main house and peered around the corner. 3 bodies in security uniforms lay motionless on the marble floor, and she could see muzzle flashes coming from the direction of Dante's study. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going according to anyone's plan except possibly Torino's. A sound from upstairs made her blood freeze. Isabella's voice, sharp with fear, followed by a man's rough laughter. They had gotten to Isabella. Sophia took the servants' staircase 2 steps at a time, the knife gripped in her right hand with the kind of desperation that made her fingers ache. Every instinct screamed at her to find Dante, to let the trained killers handle this while she found somewhere safe to hide. But Isabella was upstairs, and Sophia had promised to protect this family. She reached the 2nd-floor landing just as a man emerged from Isabella's bedroom, dragging the older woman by her arm with casual brutality. Isabella was in her nightgown, her silver hair dishevelled, but her eyes were blazing with the kind of fury that had raised a son like Dante Romano. "Where is he?" the man demanded, his accent thick with the cadence of Boston's North End. "Where's your precious boy hiding?" "Go to hell," Isabella replied, with the composure of someone who'd been threatened by better men than this. The man raised his hand to strike her, and Sophia moved. She came up the stairs behind him like a ghost, the knife sliding between his ribs with the precise angle Maria had shown her for carving roasts. The blade found his heart on the first try, and he dropped like a marionette with cut strings, his weapon clattering across the hardwood floor. Isabella stared at Sophia for a moment, taking in the blood on her hands and the deadly competence in her movements. "There are more," Isabella said simply, stepping over the body like it was a piece of furniture. "At least 6 got inside. They're looking for Dante." "Where is he?" "Pinned down in his study. They came through the kitchen, took out most of the security team before anyone could react." Isabella's voice was steady, but Sophia could see the fear beneath her composure. "They know the layout of the house, Sophia. Someone gave them detailed intelligence." Sophia felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. Someone on the inside. Someone who knew their routines, their security protocols, their family dynamics well enough to plan an assault that had gotten this far. "We need to get you somewhere safe." "No." Isabella's voice carried the authority of someone who'd been making life-and-death decisions since before Sophia was born. "We need to get to Dante. They're not here to rob us, dear. They're here to send a message, and that message requires leaving bodies behind." Sophia nodded, understanding immediately. Marco Torino hadn't come here to negotiate or intimidate. He'd come here to end the Romano family permanently. They made their way toward the main staircase, moving with the careful coordination of soldiers advancing through enemy territory. Sophia kept the bloody knife ready, while Isabella guided them through the house she'd called home for 40 years, avoiding the areas where they could hear ongoing firefights. They reached the balcony overlooking the entrance hall just as the front door exploded inward, and Dante burst through with Vincent and 4 other men, their weapons drawn and their faces grim with the promise of retribution. "Dante!" Isabella called down, her voice carrying clearly over the chaos. Sophia watched his face transform with relief when he saw his mother alive and apparently unharmed. But when his eyes found Sophia beside her, covered in blood and holding a knife like she knew how to use it, his expression shifted to something she couldn't quite read. "How many?" he called back. "At least 6 inside," Sophia answered. "1 dead upstairs, gunshots from your study and the east wing. They know the house layout." Dante's eyes flashed with understanding and fury. "Vincent, take half the team east. Sophia, get my mother out of here." "I'm not leaving you," Isabella said firmly. "Mother?" "I'm not leaving you, Antonio Dante Romano, and that's final." The use of his full name, his father's name, stopped Dante's protest cold. Sophia saw something pass between mother and son, an understanding built on 40 years of shared danger and mutual protection. "Then we finish this together," Dante said, "but you stay behind me." The hunt through the Romano house took 23 minutes from start to finish. Sophia stayed with Isabella, watching the woman who'd raised a king navigate the violence in her own home, with the steady nerves of someone who'd always known this day might come. They cornered the last of Torino's men in the conservatory, where Sophia and Isabella had shared their late-night conversation weeks earlier. He was bleeding from a shoulder wound and backed against the windows like a trapped animal, his weapon empty and his options exhausted. "Marco sends his regards," the man snarled, reaching for something in his jacket. Sophia saw the grenade a split second before anyone else did. She shoved Isabella toward the doorway and threw herself at Dante, knocking him sideways as the explosion turned the beautiful conservatory into a shower of glass and twisted metal. The blast threw all of them against the far wall, and Sophia felt something sharp slice across her arm as debris rained down around them. But when the smoke cleared and her hearing started to return, all 3 of them were alive. Dante was the first to move, checking on his mother with hands that shook despite his attempt at composure. Isabella was bruised and shaken, but uninjured. Sophia sat against the wall, watching blood seep through her sleeve, and felt something shift in the way both Romanos were looking at her. "You saved us," Isabella said quietly. "We saved each other," Sophia replied, and meant it. Dante helped her to her feet, his hands gentle despite the violence they'd all just survived. "The grenade would have killed all of us if you hadn't seen it first." "I told you I had good instincts." Dante's laugh was shaky but genuine. "You have more than good instincts, Sophia Moretti. You have the heart of a Romano." As the estate filled with the controlled chaos of cleanup and investigation, as Vincent coordinated with law enforcement contacts who would ensure this attack never appeared in any official reports, Sophia found herself sitting in the kitchen with Isabella while Maria bandaged the cut on her arm. "How do you feel?" Isabella asked quietly. Sophia considered the question seriously. She'd killed a man tonight. She'd thrown herself between a grenade and the people she loved without hesitation. She'd crossed lines she'd never imagined crossing and discovered that she could live with the consequences. "Like I finally know who I am," she said honestly. Isabella smiled, reaching over to squeeze her uninjured hand. "Welcome to the family, dear, officially this time." Outside, Chicago began the slow process of waking up to another day, unaware that the balance of power in its underworld had shifted overnight. Inside the Romano estate, Sophia Moretti sat with the knowledge that she was no longer just an employee or even a friend. She was family now, in the most dangerous and beautiful sense of the word. And in this family, blood was earned, not inherited. The aftermath of violence always felt like being underwater, Sophia thought as she sat in the Romano estate's medical room, while Dr. Reyes stitched the glass cut on her arm. Everything was muffled and strange, moving at half speed, while her body processed what her mind had done 3 hours earlier. She'd killed a man, driven a knife between his ribs with the precision Maria had taught her for preparing Sunday roasts. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, heavy but not unbearable. She'd expected guilt, horror, regret. Instead, she felt only a quiet satisfaction that Isabella was alive. 22 stitches, Dr. Reyes announced, wrapping her arm in clean bandages. You're lucky the glass didn't hit anything vital. Keep it dry for the next few days, and I'll remove the stitches in 2 weeks. Thank you, Sophia said, flexing her fingers to test her mobility. Her right hand, the one that had held the knife, moved without stiffness. Good. She had a feeling she might need that dexterity again. Dr. Reyes packed his supplies with the efficient movements of someone who'd treated more than his share of Romano family emergencies. Mrs. Romano asked me to check on you when I finished with the others. She's concerned about shock, delayed emotional responses. I'm fine. Doctor? Reyes studied her face with professional assessment. You've just experienced significant trauma, Miss Moretti. It would be normal to feel... I said I'm fine. The firmness in her voice seemed to surprise him, but he nodded and left her alone in the medical room that smelled of antiseptic and old leather. Sophia sat on the examination table, looking down at her hands, steady, unmarked except for the small cuts from flying glass, capable of violence when necessary. She thought about the man she'd killed, about the split second when she'd seen him raise his hand to strike Isabella and made the choice to end his life. There had been no hesitation, no moral debate, just the crystal-clear understanding that he was a threat to someone she loved, and threats needed to be eliminated. The door opened and Dante entered, moving with the careful precision of someone who was injured but refusing to show it. She could see blood seeping through the bandage on his shoulder, and there were bruises forming along his jawline that spoke to closer combat than she'd witnessed. How bad? He asked, nodding toward her bandaged arm. 22 stitches, nothing vital damaged. Sophia studied his face, reading the exhaustion and something deeper in his dark eyes. How many? 7 total, all Torino's men, all dead. Dante sat heavily in the chair beside her examination table, suddenly looking older than his 34 years. Vincent's people are handling the clean-up. By morning, this will be a home invasion gone wrong. 3 security guards died heroically protecting their employer's family. Sophia nodded, understanding that this was how Dante's world worked. Violence was sanitized, rewritten, transformed into stories that the outside world could accept. She wondered if she should feel disturbed by how easily she'd accepted that reality. What about Marco? Vincent's handling that personally. By dawn, the Torino family will be out of business permanently. Dante's voice was flat, matter-of-fact, like he was discussing shipping schedules rather than the systematic elimination of human beings. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 people who'd survived something that should have destroyed them, processing the cost of that survival. I need to tell you something, Dante said finally, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Sophia looked at him, noting the way he was avoiding her eyes, the tension in his shoulders that had nothing to do with his injuries. When I saw you upstairs with my mother covered in blood, holding that knife, for a moment I didn't recognize you. You looked like... He paused, searching for words. You looked like someone who belonged in my world, someone who could do what needed to be done without hesitation. Is that a bad thing? It should be. 3 months ago, you were serving coffee at a diner, worried about bus fare and rent money. Tonight you killed a man to protect my mother without blinking. Dante finally met her eyes. That kind of transformation should terrify me. But it doesn't? Dante was quiet for so long that Sophia wondered if he was going to answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone confessing something he'd never said aloud. It doesn't terrify me because I've been in love with you since the night you helped my mother in the rain. And tonight, when I saw you choose violence to protect our family, I realized that you're not becoming someone new. You're becoming who you always were underneath. The words hit Sophia like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with adrenaline. Love. He'd said love, not attraction or affection, or any of the careful euphemisms people used when they were testing the waters. Dante, I know it's complicated. I know what I'm asking you to accept, what kind of life I'm offering. But tonight proved that you're already part of this world, whether we acknowledge it or not. The only question is whether you want to be part of it with me. Sophia thought about Isabella's words in the conservatory, about choosing love over safety and trusting that the person you're protecting is worth the risk. She thought about the way Dante had looked when he'd thought she might be hurt, the desperate relief in his voice when he'd found her alive. She thought about the man upstairs whose blood was still under her fingernails, and the complete absence of regret she felt about ending his life. What exactly are you asking me? Dante stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the estate grounds, where clean-up crews were working to erase all evidence of the night's violence. When he turned back to her, his expression was vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. I'm asking you to marry me, Sophia. Not someday, not when things are safer or simpler. I'm asking you to marry me knowing exactly who I am and what that means. Sophia felt the world tilt sideways. Dante, I'm asking you to be my wife, my partner, my equal in everything we build together. I'm asking you to help me run an empire that exists in the shadows, to stand beside me when enemies come calling, to love me despite knowing what my hands have done. He crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her uninjured hand in both of his. I'm asking you to choose this life completely, knowing that there's no going back once you say yes. Because if you marry me, Sophia Moretti, you become Sophia Romano, and Sophia Romano will have enemies, responsibilities, and blood on her hands. Sophia looked down at their joined hands, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The rainy night when she'd helped a stranger, the dinner invitation that had changed everything, the slow transformation from invisible waitress to essential family member to someone capable of killing to protect the people she loved. And if I say no? Then I'll make sure you're safe and comfortable for the rest of your life, but I'll understand that what I'm offering isn't worth what I'm asking you to give up. Sophia thought about her old life, the double shifts and past due notices and careful budgeting that had defined her existence for so many years. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, terrified of losing a job that barely paid enough to survive. Then she thought about the woman she was now. The woman who could coordinate dinner parties for Chicago's most dangerous families, who could spot surveillance and read tactical situations, who could drive a knife into someone's heart to protect the people she loved. I have one condition, she said. Dante's eyes searched her face. Name it. When this is over, the clean-up, the investigations, the retaliation against anyone who helped Torino, I want to visit my sister in Milwaukee. I want to tell her about my new life, introduce her to my new family. She deserves to know who I've become. Dante's smile was slow and devastating. Is that a yes? Sophia thought about Isabella's words. In this house, family is the only thing that matters more than survival. She thought about the panic button in her nightstand drawer and the blood under her fingernails and the man she loved looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered in the dark. Yes, she said simply. It's a yes to all of it. Dante stood and kissed her then, gentle despite the violence they'd survived, reverent despite the blood that still stained both of their clothes. When they broke apart, Sophia could see tears in his eyes that he wasn't bothering to hide. I love you, Sophia Romano, he said against her forehead. I love you too, Dante, all of you, even the parts that should terrify me. Outside the medical room, the Romano estate continued its process of healing and rebuilding. But inside, 2 people who'd found each other in the aftermath of violence held each other close and planned a future built on love, loyalty, and the understanding that some bonds could only be forged in blood and fire. Sophia Moretti was dead. Long live Sophia Romano. 6 months later, spring had transformed Chicago into something that almost looked hopeful. The trees along West Madison Street wore new green like expensive jewellery, and the morning sun caught the windows of Mickey's Diner in a way that made even that humble establishment shine like polished silver. Sophia Romano stepped out of the armoured Mercedes and onto the sidewalk where she'd once waited for buses in shoes, held together with electrical tape. The woman who emerged bore little resemblance to the exhausted waitress who'd served coffee and worried about rent money in what felt like another lifetime. Her coat was Italian cashmere, tailored to perfection and worth more than most people's monthly salary. Her wedding ring caught the sunlight, a perfect solitaire that Dante had slipped onto her finger during a ceremony in the Romano estate's garden, witnessed by Isabella and Vincent and the kind of powerful families who considered the union a matter of international importance. But it was her eyes that had changed most. They carried the steady confidence of someone who'd learned to read danger in a room full of smiling faces, someone who'd discovered that love and violence could coexist in the same heart without contradiction. "You sure about this?" Dante asked, appearing beside her with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent 6 months learning to move as half of a unit rather than a solitary predator. Absolutely," Sophia smiled, taking his arm as they approached the diner's entrance. "Besides, I want to see Rick's face when he realizes who I am now." The bell above the door chimed the same off-key note it always had, and the smell of burnt coffee and industrial cleaning products hit them like a wave of institutional nostalgia. But everything else had changed. The cracked vinyl booths had been reupholstered in deep burgundy leather. The fluorescent lights had been replaced with warm Edison bulbs that made the space feel cosy rather than harsh. Fresh flowers graced each table, and the daily specials were written on a chalkboard in elegant script rather than Rick's barely legible scrawl. "Can I help you?" The hostess was a young woman Sophia didn't recognise, professionally dressed and clearly trained in customer service that extended beyond grudging tolerance. "We're here to see the manager," Sophia said pleasantly. "I'm Sophia Romano. I believe he's expecting us." Recognition dawned in the girl's eyes, not of Sophia personally, but of the Romano name and what it meant in Chicago. "Of course, Mrs. Romano, right this way." They were led to a corner booth that had been reserved despite the lunch rush, and Sophia found herself sitting in the exact spot where she'd served Dante his first cup of coffee 8 months ago. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of them. "Nervous?" Dante asked, his hand finding hers across the table. "Curious. I want to see what he's done with the place since I left." Rick appeared from the kitchen wearing a clean shirt and an expression of barely contained panic. The man who'd once counted napkins like gold bars and docked her pay for bathroom breaks was now faced with the reality that his former waitress had married into one of Chicago's most powerful families. "Sophia, I mean Mrs. Romano, this is an honour." He wiped his palms on his pants before extending a hand that shook slightly. "Welcome back." Sophia shook his hand with the same professional courtesy she'd use with any business associate. "Hello, Rick. The renovations look beautiful. You've really transformed the place." "Thank you. When I heard about your change in circumstances, I thought it might be wise to upgrade our standards, make the place more worthy of our distinguished clientele." The irony was exquisite. Rick had fired her for attracting the wrong kind of attention, and now he was desperately hoping that same attention might elevate his business. "I'm glad to hear business is going well," Sophia said diplomatically. "Actually, that's why we're here. My husband and I are looking to invest in local businesses, support establishments that serve the community." Rick's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Investment? You mean—" "A partnership," Dante interrupted smoothly. "Mrs. Romano has fond memories of working here, and we believe in supporting the places that shaped the people we love." Sophia watched Rick's face cycle through confusion, hope, and desperate calculation. She could practically see him trying to figure out how much money he could ask for without seeming greedy, and how much grovelling was required to secure Romano family backing. "That's incredibly generous," Rick managed. "I don't know what to say." "You could start with an apology," Sophia suggested gently. Rick's face went pale. "An apology?" For firing me without cause, for treating your employees like they were disposable, for creating a workplace where people were afraid to take bathroom breaks. Sophia's voice remained pleasant, conversational. I understand you were protecting your business, but kindness costs nothing, Rick, and cruelty always comes with a price. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Rick looked between Sophia and Dante, clearly understanding that his future depended on his next words. You're absolutely right, he said finally. I treated you badly, Sophia. You were one of my best employees, and I fired you because I was scared of something I didn't understand. I'm sorry. Sophia studied his face, reading the sincerity beneath the desperation. Apology accepted. Now let's talk about improving working conditions for your staff. They spent an hour discussing profit-sharing plans, healthcare benefits, and management training programs that would transform Mickey's Diner from a survival wage trap into something approaching a respectable workplace. Dante mostly listened, occasionally adding a comment that made Rick pale and nod frantically. As they prepared to leave, Sophia noticed a familiar figure at the bus stop across the street, an elderly woman struggling with heavy grocery bags, while other pedestrians hurried past without offering help. "Excuse me for a moment," Sophia said, standing up from the booth. She crossed the street with purposeful strides, her heels clicking against the pavement with the confidence of someone who no longer worried about the cost of anything. The elderly woman looked up as Sophia approached, wariness flickering in her eyes at the sight of someone clearly wealthy approaching her. "Let me help you with those," Sophia said, taking the heavier bags without waiting for permission. "Oh, you don't need to." "I insist. Where are you headed?" The woman pointed to an apartment building 3 blocks away, and Sophia nodded, adjusting her grip on the bags. "I'm going that direction anyway." They walked together in comfortable silence, 2 women separated by circumstances, but united by the simple human courtesy that Sophia had never forgotten how to offer. When they reached the apartment building, the elderly woman turned to Sophia with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, dear. Most people your age wouldn't bother with an old woman and her groceries." "Most people don't know what they're missing," Sophia replied. "Kindness is its own reward." As she walked back to where Dante waited beside their car, Sophia felt the completeness of the circle she'd travelled. 6 months ago, she'd helped a stranger and unknowingly changed the trajectory of her entire life. Today, she'd helped another stranger, but this time from a position of power rather than vulnerability. "Feel good?" Dante asked, as they drove away from the neighbourhood that had once defined the limits of Sophia's world. "It feels right," Sophia said, watching the familiar streets pass by through bulletproof windows. "Like I remember who I used to be, without wanting to go back to who I used to be." Dante reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing the outline of her wedding ring. "Isabella's right, you know, about kindness being strength. Your mother is always right about everything. It's one of her most annoying qualities." Dante laughed, and the sound filled the car with warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine streaming through the windows. "Wait until you've been married to a Romano man for 40 years. Then you'll understand why she's earned the right to be right about everything." Sophia squeezed his hand, thinking about the future they were building together, one that balanced the requirements of his dangerous world with the values she'd carried from her humble one. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she was serving coffee and counting tips, but it was the life she'd chosen with full knowledge of its costs and rewards. Outside their windows, Chicago continued its eternal dance of ambition and survival, love and betrayal, ordinary moments and extraordinary transformations. Inside the car, Sophia Romano sat with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd learned that the most important changes weren't about where you ended up, but about who you chose to become along the way. She'd started as a waitress who helped strangers because it was right. Now she was a queen who helped strangers because she could. The kindness remained constant. Only the power to protect it had changed. And in Sophia's world, in Dante's world, that was the only transformation that truly mattered. Dante Romano had built his empire on the principle that human nature was fundamentally selfish. In 34 years of life, 20 of them spent in the family business, he'd seen mothers sell out their children for drug money, priests embezzle from orphanages, and politicians auction their souls for campaign contributions. Goodness, he'd learned, was a luxury that only existed when it cost nothing. Watching Sophia Moretti risk everything for his mother had just shattered that worldview like a bullet through plate glass. He sat in the driver's seat of his armoured Escalade, hands gripping the leather steering wheel with enough force to leave permanent impressions. The rain drummed against the bulletproof windows, each drop a percussion beat that matched the rhythm of his pulse. Isabella was safe in the Mercedes ahead of him, driven by Marco, his most trusted bodyguard. But Dante couldn't stop replaying what he'd witnessed. The girl, Sophia, had moved without hesitation. No calculation, no assessment of what she might gain. She'd seen someone in pain and responded with the kind of instinctive compassion that Dante had thought was extinct in Chicago. Maybe extinct everywhere. His phone buzzed against the dashboard. A text from Marco. "Mrs. Romano secured. Hospital or home?" Dante typed back quickly. "Home. Dr. Reyes is already en route." But his eyes remained fixed on the diner across the street, where Sophia had disappeared back into the harsh fluorescent lighting. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see her moving between tables, a slight figure in a soaked uniform that clung to her like a second skin. Even from this distance, he could read the exhaustion in her posture, the way she held her shoulders like she was carrying the weight of the world. His research team would have a full background report within the hour. Name, address, employment history, criminal record, if any, family connections, financial status, medical records. In Dante's world, information was ammunition, and he never went into any situation unarmed. But he already suspected what they'd find. Sophia Moretti would turn out to be exactly what she appeared, nobody special, nobody with connections or leverage or hidden agendas, nobody who had any reason to care about a sick old woman on a rainy sidewalk. Dante had inherited the Romano organization from his father when he was 26, and he'd spent the last 8 years transforming it from a neighborhood crew into something that could go toe-to-toe with the Chicago outfit. He controlled 3 restaurants, 2 construction companies, and a shipping operation that moved everything from olive oil to items that required more creative, customs documentation. He had judges in his pocket, cops on his payroll, and politicians who returned his calls before their wives. But he'd built it all on the assumption that everyone had a price. Everyone could be bought, threatened, or leveraged into compliance. The idea that someone might act purely from kindness, especially toward a stranger who could offer nothing in return, was so foreign to his experience that he literally didn't know how to process it. Sophia emerged from the diner 20 minutes later, moving with the defeated shuffle of someone who'd just been thoroughly dressed down by their boss. Her uniform shirt was still damp from the rain, and she'd wrapped her arms around herself in a futile attempt to ward off the October chill. She didn't have a jacket anymore. She'd given it to Isabella without a second thought. Dante watched her walk to the bus stop 3 blocks away, her cheap sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the neon signs of closed shops and empty bars. She waited in the rain for 12 minutes before a CTA bus wheezed to a stop and swallowed her into its brightly lit interior. Even then, Dante didn't start his engine. His phone rang. Vincent Torino, his lieutenant, and the closest thing he had to a friend. "Boss, Marco said there was an incident with Mrs. Romano. Everything all right?" "She's fine," Dante replied, watching Sophia's bus disappear into the maze of downtown traffic. "Minor episode. She's at home with the doctor now." "Good. Listen, we've got the Castellano meeting tomorrow night. You want me to move forward with the usual security arrangements?" "Yeah, the usual." Dante finally started the engine, the V8 rumbling to life like a caged predator. "Vinny, I need you to run a background check for me. Full workup." "Sure thing. What's the name?" Sophia Moretti works at Mickey's Diner on West Madison. I want everything you can find. There was a pause. This related to tonight? Maybe. Just get me the information. You got it, boss? Dante ended the call and pulled away from the curb, his tires hissing against the wet asphalt. He took the long way home, driving through neighborhoods where his influence was felt but not seen. Past the construction sites where Romano Enterprises was rebuilding the south side one block at a time. Past the shipping warehouse where tomorrow's deliveries were already being sorted and loaded. Past the restaurant where his mother had worked as a hostess 40 years ago, back when the Romano name meant nothing to anyone outside a 6-block radius. The family estate sat on 12 acres in Winnetka, surrounded by walls that looked decorative but could stop a truck bomb, and patrolled by guards who looked like landscapers but carried submachine guns under their work shirts. Dante pulled through the gates and up the circular driveway, past the fountain that had been imported stone by stone from his grandfather's village in Sicily. Isabella was in the living room when he entered, wrapped in a cashmere shawl and looking annoyed that doctor. Reyes was taking her blood pressure for the 3rd time in 2 hours. Dante, tell this man I'm perfectly fine. It was just a dizzy spell. It was a cardiac event, Mrs. Romano, Dr. Reyes corrected gently. Minor, but still cause for concern. You need to reduce your stress levels and... My stress levels are fine, thank you. Isabella's voice carried the authority of someone who'd been giving orders for 68 years. Dante, come sit with me. Dr. Reyes packed up his equipment with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned not to argue with Romano women. After he left, Dante sat beside his mother on the Italian leather sofa that had cost more than most people's cars. Tell me about the girl, Isabella said without preamble. Her name is Sophia Moretti. She works at the diner where it happened. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Isabella fixed him with the same grey eyes that had intimidated him as a child and still made him squirm as an adult. Tell me why you're thinking about her. Dante was quiet for a long moment, staring at the oil painting above the fireplace. It showed his grandfather's vineyard in Sicily, painted from memory by an artist who'd never seen the original. Most of their family history was like that, reconstructed from fragments and wishes, built on stories that might or might not be true. She didn't hesitate, he said finally. Everyone else walked by, businessmen, students, tourists. They all saw you and decided it wasn't their problem, but she saw you and didn't even think. She just acted. And that surprises you? In my experience, people don't help strangers unless they're getting something in return. Money, status, leverage, something. Isabella reached over and took his hand, her fingers still strong despite the afternoon's scare. Your father used to say the same thing. He believed that kindness was weakness, that compassion was just stupidity dressed up in pretty words. He wasn't wrong, wasn't he? Isabella squeezed his hand. That girl tonight, Sophia, she had nothing to gain from helping me. Less than nothing, actually. She probably lost money, possibly her job, but she helped anyway. Your father would have called that stupidity. What would you call it? Isabella smiled, and for a moment she looked like the young woman in their family photos, the one who'd fallen in love with a dangerous man and chosen to build a life in the shadows. I'd call it strength, she said. It takes real courage to be kind in a world that punishes kindness. It takes strength to see someone in need and choose to act, even when you know it might cost you everything. Dante thought about Sophia's soaked uniform, her ruined shoes, the way she'd wrapped her own jacket around a stranger's shoulders without being asked. He thought about the bus stop where she'd waited in the rain, and the cramped apartment she was probably sitting in right now, counting the tips from her shift and wondering if she'd have enough for groceries. She doesn't know who you are, he said. No, and she doesn't know who you are either. That might be for the best. Isabella studied his face with the intensity of someone who'd spent 40 years reading between the lines of what Romano men said versus what they meant. When was the last time someone did something nice for you without wanting something in return? She asked. Dante considered the question seriously. business associates who laughed at his jokes because he signed their paychecks, women who flirted with him because he could buy them designer handbags and European vacations, politicians who shook his hand because he donated to their campaigns. Even his inner circle, men he trusted with his life, were loyal because he paid them well and protected their families. Everyone in his world wanted something from him: money, protection, access, power. He couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at him and seen just a person rather than an opportunity. "I can't remember," he admitted. "Then maybe," Isabella said softly, "it's time you reminded yourself what that feels like." His phone buzzed with a text from Vinny. "Preliminary report on Sophia Moretti ready. Want me to send it over?" Dante stared at the message for a long moment. With one reply, he could know everything there was to know about Sophia Moretti. Her secrets, her vulnerabilities, her weaknesses. He could map out her life like a military campaign and figure out exactly how to insert himself into it. He could treat her like everyone else in his world, as a problem to be solved or an asset to be acquired. Or he could choose to meet her the way she'd met his mother, without agenda, without calculation, with simple human curiosity about who she really was beneath the uniform and the exhaustion and the selfless compassion. Dante typed back, "Not yet. Let me handle this my way first." Then he leaned back against the sofa and started planning his return to Mickey's Diner. The temperature in Mickey's Diner dropped 10 degrees the moment Dante Romano walked through the door. It wasn't the October wind that followed him inside, though that cut through the restaurant like a blade. It wasn't the rain that dripped from his charcoal wool coat onto the cracked linoleum floor. It was something else entirely. Something that made the other customers look up from their coffee and scrambled eggs, take one look at the man in the doorway, and suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere. Sophia noticed it immediately, the way conversations died mid-sentence. The way Mrs. Henderson, who'd been nursing the same cup of coffee for 2 hours, suddenly found enough money for a tip and hurried toward the exit. The way even Rick, who usually spent his evenings yelling at the staff about everything from napkin usage to bathroom breaks, retreated into his office and closed the door. Within 5 minutes, Mickey's Diner, which had been half full when Dante arrived, was completely empty except for Sophia and the man who'd just transformed the entire atmosphere with his presence. He chose a corner booth, the kind with cracked vinyl that had been repaired so many times it looked like a patchwork quilt. But he sat in it like it was a throne, his back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the room's exits and blind spots. Everything about him screamed money and power, from the perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Sophia's annual rent to the watch on his wrist that caught the fluorescent light like captured starlight. Sophia had seen men like him before, not often, but enough to recognize the type. They were the ones who bought entire restaurants just to have a private meal, who tipped in hundreds because the amount was meaningless to them, who could ruin lives with a phone call and never lose sleep over it. But she'd never had one sit in her section during the dinner rush at Mickey's Diner. She grabbed a pot of coffee and approached his table with the same professional composure she used for every customer, whether they ordered pie and coffee or demanded modifications to every item on the menu. Rich or poor, polite or rude, they all got the same service. It was a matter of pride, one of the few luxuries she could afford. "Good evening," she said, setting down a clean cup and saucer without being asked. "Coffee to start." Dante looked up at her, and Sophia felt something shift in her chest. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they seemed to see everything. The patches on her uniform, the way she'd tied her hair back with a rubber band because she couldn't afford proper hair ties, the careful distance she kept between herself and his table. But there was no judgment in his gaze, no dismissal, just curiosity. "Please," he said, and his voice was different from what she'd expected, quieter, warmer, like he was speaking to a friend rather than ordering from help. Sophia poured the coffee with steady hands, her years of experience keeping the stream perfect despite the way her pulse had inexplicably quickened. She set the pot down and pulled out her order pad, pen poised. Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes with the menu? Actually, Dante said, leaning back against the booth's vinyl cushions, I was hoping you might recommend something. I'm not familiar with the local cuisine. There was something in the way he said it that suggested he was talking about more than just food. Sophia glanced around the empty diner at the faded photographs of Chicago landmarks that hadn't been updated since the 1980s, at the handwritten specials board that offered meatloaf and mashed potatoes for $8.99. Well, she said carefully, the pie is good. Martha makes it fresh every morning. She's been here longer than anyone can remember. The coffee's not bad if you don't mind it strong, and the grilled cheese is probably your safest bet if you're not used to this kind of place. Grilled cheese it is, then. Dante closed the menu and handed it back to her, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. His hands were warm, she noticed, and surprisingly calloused for someone who looked like he'd never done manual labour in his life. And tell me about Martha. She's been here long. Sophia found herself relaxing slightly, though she couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the genuine interest in his voice, or the way he was looking at her like she was a person rather than just a function. 32 years, she said, leaning against the table's edge. She started as a waitress when she was 16, worked her way up to head cook. Her apple pie won the county fair 3 years running before they banned her from entering because it wasn't fair to the competition. That's impressive. Dante's smile was small but seemed genuine. And you? How long have you been here? About 18 months. It's... Sophia paused, unsure how much truth to share with this well-dressed stranger who'd somehow emptied her restaurant just by walking into it. It pays the bills. Must be challenging work, long hours, difficult customers? Some customers are more difficult than others, Sophia said, then immediately worried she'd overstepped. But Dante laughed, a sound that was warmer than she'd expected. I imagined so. What did you do before this? The question was casual, conversational, but Sophia sensed layers beneath it. Like he was genuinely curious about her answer, not just making small talk while he waited for his food. Little bit of everything, she said honestly. Retail, cleaning offices, catering when I could get it, whatever kept the lights on. No family business to fall back on, no connections to help you find something more stable. Sophia's laugh was shorter than his had been, with an edge that she tried to soften. Not everyone has family businesses, Mr. Romano, he said. Dante Romano. The name should have meant something to her. In certain circles of Chicago, it would have meant everything. But Sophia just nodded politely and said, Nice to meet you, Mr. Romano. I'll get your order started. She turned toward the kitchen, but his voice stopped her. Sophia. She froze. She was wearing her name tag, so it wasn't impossible that he'd read it. But the way he said her name, like he'd been thinking about it, testing how it sounded, sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the October weather. Yes? Yesterday evening, the woman who collapsed outside, she was my mother. Sophia's world tilted sideways. The elegant woman in the cashmere coat, the one she'd helped into the Mercedes, the one who'd thanked her with such genuine warmth, that was his mother. Which meant this man, this obviously powerful and dangerous stranger sitting in her section, had been watching when she'd made the choice to help. Is she all right? The question came out automatically, genuine concern overriding her sudden nervousness. She is, thanks to you. Dante's eyes never left her face. You didn't have to help her. It cost you time, money, probably got you in trouble with your boss. Why did you do it? Sophia stared at him, trying to process the question. It seemed so obvious to her that she wasn't sure how to explain it. She needed help, she said finally. People were just walking past her like she didn't exist. I couldn't just leave her there. Most people would have. Then most people are wrong. The words came out more forcefully than she'd intended, with a conviction that surprised even her. Dante sat back slightly, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel like he was reading her thoughts. "My mother wants to thank you properly," he said after a long moment. "For what you did, she'd like to invite you to dinner." Sophia blinked. "That's very kind, but it's really not necessary. I didn't do anything special." "She disagrees, so do I." There was something in his tone that made it clear this wasn't really a request. Not a threat exactly, but not a casual invitation either. Sophia found herself caught between gratitude and wariness, unsure which instinct to trust. "Mr. Romano, I appreciate the offer, but I work doubles most nights. I don't really have time for—" "When do you have a night off?" The question cut through her polite deflection like it didn't exist. Sophia realized that this man was used to getting what he wanted, and he wanted her to have dinner with his mother. The smart thing would be to keep refusing, to maintain the boundaries between her world and whatever world he came from. But the way he was looking at her, like her answer actually mattered to him, made the smart thing feel impossible. "Sundays," she said quietly. "I have Sundays off." "This Sunday, then. I'll pick you up at 7. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a command either. It was somewhere in between, delivered with the confidence of someone who expected to be accommodated, but was willing to be gracious about it. "I don't have your address," Dante continued, "but I'm sure I can find it." The casual way he said it sent another chill through Sophia. Of course he could find it. Men like him could find anything they wanted to find. "I'll pick you up here," she said quickly, "at the diner, 7 o'clock Sunday." Dante nodded, seemingly satisfied with the compromise. "I'll have someone call with the details." Sophia nodded back, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was agreeing to. She turned back toward the kitchen, her mind spinning with questions she didn't know how to ask and answers she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Behind her, Dante Romano sat in his corner booth and smiled. Not the predatory smile that his business associates knew and feared, but something warmer. Something that hadn't crossed his face in years. For the first time in his adult life, someone had said yes to him without knowing what he could do for them or to them. Someone had agreed to spend an evening with his family, not because they wanted access to his power or his money, but because they were the kind of person who couldn't walk away from someone in need. Sophia Moretti had just become the most interesting person in his world, and in Dante's world, interesting was the same thing as dangerous. The eviction notice was taped to Sophia's apartment door when she got home from her shift. The white paper stark against the peeling paint like a surrender flag. 30 days. That's how long she had before the landlord could legally throw her belongings onto the sidewalk and change the locks. Sophia stared at the notice for a full minute before tearing it down and crumpling it into her jacket pocket. The hallway smelled like boiled cabbage and disappointment, fluorescent lights flickering overhead like dying fireflies. Someone was arguing in 2B, their voices muffled but angry. Someone else was playing music too loud in 3A, bass thumping through thin walls that had never been designed to contain human misery. Inside her studio apartment, Sophia did the math on the back of an envelope she'd been saving for exactly this kind of emergency. Rent, $1,200. Sister's medical bills, $847 this month. Utilities, $134. Groceries, maybe $200 if she was careful. Transportation, $58 for the bus pass. Total, $2,439. Her take-home pay from Mickey's Diner, after taxes and Rick's creative deductions, $1,800 on a good month. The deficit stared back at her in black ink, as unforgiving as arithmetic. She could pick up more shifts, but Rick had already cut everyone's hours because business was slow. She could find a second job, but that would mean less time for the catering gigs that paid better when she could get them. She could. Her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered anyway. In her financial situation, every call might be a lifeline. "Sophia, this is Rick." Her heart sank. Rick never called. Rick barely acknowledged her existence unless she was standing directly in front of him, and even then he usually looked through her like she was transparent. "Hi, Rick. Is everything okay?" Yeah, well, no. Listen, I need to talk to you about what happened tonight with that guy in the suit. Sophia sat down on her second-hand futon, the springs protesting under her weight. What about him? Look, I don't know who he was, but guys like that don't come into places like Mickey's unless they're looking for trouble. I saw how the other customers cleared out when he walked in. That's bad for business, Sophia. Real bad. He was just having dinner, she said weakly, though even as she said it, she knew Rick was right. Normal people didn't have that kind of presence, didn't make entire restaurants empty just by existing in them. Yeah, well, dinner or not, I can't have my staff attracting the wrong kind of attention. I'm sorry, Sophia, but I'm going to have to let you go. The words hit her like a physical blow. Rick, please, I need this job. I can't afford to... I already made up my mind. Your last shift was tonight. I'll mail your final check. The line went dead. Sophia stared at her phone for a long moment, waiting for the reality of what had just happened to sink in. Fired. She'd been fired for helping an old woman and then serving coffee to her son, for doing her job exactly the way she'd always done it. She looked around her apartment, 400 square feet of cramped desperation that she could no longer afford. The card table she used as a desk, stacked with medical bills and past-due notices, the hot plate where she cooked meals that consisted mostly of ramen noodles and whatever vegetables were marked down at the grocery store, the Murphy bed that didn't actually fold up anymore because the mechanism had broken 6 months ago and she couldn't afford to fix it. This was her life. This was what she'd built after aging out of the foster system at 18 with nothing but a high school diploma and a stubborn determination to make something of herself. 10 years of 60-hour weeks and side hustles and careful budgeting, and she was still one emergency away from homelessness. Her phone rang again. This time, the number was even more unfamiliar. Too many digits, with an area code she didn't recognize. Hello? Sophia Moretti? The voice was male, professionally neutral. Yes? My name is Vincent Torino. I work for Mr. Romano. He asked me to call about Sunday evening. Sophia's grip tightened on the phone. She'd almost forgotten about the dinner invitation, though it had been less than 3 hours since Dante had extended it. In her current situation, it felt like a lifeline and a potential disaster wrapped into one package. Right, the dinner. Mr. Romano will pick you up at the diner at 7 o'clock as discussed. However, he wanted me to mention that the dress code for the evening is business formal. If that presents any difficulties, he's authorized me to arrange for appropriate attire. Sophia looked down at her uniform, polyester pants with permanent stains, a shirt that had been white once but was now closer to grey, shoes held together with electrical tape and prayer. Her only dress was a black number she'd bought at Goodwill for job interviews, and it had seen better decades. That's very kind, she said carefully, but I'll manage. Of course. Also, Mr. Romano wanted me to give you this number. Vincent rattled off a phone number. In case you need to reach him before Sunday. Sophia scribbled the number on the back of the eviction notice, wondering why someone like Dante Romano would want her to be able to reach him. In her experience, powerful men gave you their number when they wanted something from you, not when they were doing you a favour. Thank you, she said. Have a good evening, Miss Moretti. After he hung up, Sophia sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, staring at the phone number written in blue ink. Outside, Chicago hummed with its usual symphony of sirens and traffic and human ambition. But inside her 4 walls, everything was quiet except for the sound of her own breathing and the tick of the digital clock she'd bought at a gas station. She thought about Dante Romano, about the way he'd looked at her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve, about his mother, Isabella, who'd smiled at her with genuine warmth even while lying hurt on a wet sidewalk, about the invitation to dinner that had felt like something between a request and a command. She thought about the eviction notice in her pocket and the phone call from Rick that had just destroyed her carefully constructed life, about the medical bills that kept coming no matter how many extra shifts she picked up, and the sister in Milwaukee who depended on her even though they hadn't spoken in 6 months. She thought about the choices that had led her here and the choices she was going to have to make now. Then she picked up her phone and dialed the number Vincent had given her. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Sophia. Not a question. Like he'd been expecting her call, like he knew exactly why she was reaching out to him in the darkness of her suddenly uncertain world. Mr. Romano, she said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. I wanted to thank you for the dinner invitation, and I wanted to ask you something. I'm listening. She took a deep breath, tasting her own pride as she prepared to swallow it. When you said your mother wanted to thank me properly, what did you mean by properly? Dante was quiet for a long moment, and Sophia could hear something in the background that sounded like classical music and expensive silence. My mother believes in repaying debts, he said finally. She thinks kindness should be rewarded, especially when it comes at personal cost. She's old-fashioned that way. And you? What do you believe? I believe, Dante said slowly, that people who do the right thing when it costs them everything deserve to have someone in their corner, someone who can make sure their kindness doesn't go punished. Sophia closed her eyes. She knew what he was offering without him having to say it explicitly. Protection, security, a way out of the endless cycle of desperation that had defined her adult life. All she had to do was show up to dinner and accept whatever terms came with his family's gratitude. I'll see you Sunday, she said. I'll see you Sunday, Sophia. The line went dead, and Sophia sat in her apartment that she could no longer afford, holding a phone that connected her to a man who could probably solve all her problems with a single phone call. She thought about Isabella's words, I won't forget this. She was beginning to understand that in the Romano family, remembering came with a price tag. The question was whether she was desperate enough to pay it. Outside her window, Chicago glittered with a million lights, each one representing someone trying to build a life in a city that didn't care whether they succeeded or failed. Tomorrow, she would start looking for a new job, a new apartment, a new way to keep her head above water. But Sunday, she would put on her goodwill dress and let Dante Romano show her what it looked like when kindness was properly rewarded, even if it meant discovering that some debts could never really be repaid. The Romano estate rose from the Winnetka landscape like something carved from a different century, all limestone and wrought iron and windows that reflected the October sky like dark mirrors. Sophia pressed her face to the passenger window of Dante's Mercedes, watching the property unfold as they drove through gates that had probably cost more than she'd ever seen in her lifetime. It's beautiful, she said softly, and meant it, though beautiful felt like an inadequate word for what she was seeing. The gardens were perfectly manicured even in autumn, with sculptures that looked like they belonged in museums and fountains that sang with the sound of falling water. The driveway curved through it all like a river of black stone, leading to a house that could have sheltered 50 families. My grandfather built it in 1952, Dante said, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel. He wanted something that would last, something that said the Romano name was here to stay. Sophia nodded, though she was thinking that men who built houses like fortresses usually had enemies worth hiding from. The walls that surrounded the property were high and topped with what looked like decorative ironwork, but was probably something more functional. The landscaping was beautiful, but it also provided clear sightlines in every direction. Even the fountain placement seemed designed to eliminate blind spots. She'd changed into her black goodwill dress and her only pair of heels, second-hand pumps that were a half-size too big and made her ankles wobble when she walked. She'd spent an hour trying to make her hair look like something other than a waitress who'd just finished a double shift, but the mirror had offered no miracles. At least the dress was clean and didn't have any visible stains. Dante parked in front of the main entrance, where double doors waited beneath a portico that could have sheltered a small parade. He came around to open her door, offering his hand to help her out of the low-slung car. His touch was warm and steady, and Sophia was grateful for it when her two big heels hit the uneven stone. "My mother's waiting in the sitting room," he said, guiding her toward the entrance. "Fair warning, she's been looking forward to this all week." The front doors opened before they reached them, revealing a woman in her 50s wearing a black dress that probably cost more than Sophia's monthly rent. She smiled warmly and stepped aside with the practiced grace of someone who'd been managing households for decades. "Mr. Romano, Miss Moretti, Mrs. Romano is in the blue sitting room." "Thank you, Maria." Dante's hand settled on the small of Sophia's back as they walked through an entrance hall that soared 3 stories toward a chandelier that looked like captured starlight. "Maria's been with the family for 20 years. She keeps us all in line." Sophia smiled at Maria, who smiled back with genuine warmth that made some of Sophia's nervousness ease. At least not everyone in this house treated her like a curiosity or a potential threat. The blue sitting room was smaller than Sophia had expected, though that was relative. It was still larger than her entire apartment. The furniture was antique, but comfortable looking, upholstered in silk that had probably been woven by hand. Paintings covered the walls, not the kind of art you bought to impress people, but the kind you inherited from family who'd had good taste and better connections. Isabella Romano was sitting in a wing-back chair by the fireplace, and she looked up when they entered with a smile that transformed her entire face. "Sophia, my dear, come here." Sophia approached carefully, unsure of the protocol for greeting the mother of someone who might or might not be a dangerous criminal. But Isabella rose from her chair and embraced her like an old friend, enveloping her in the scent of expensive perfume and genuine affection. "You look lovely," Isabella said, stepping back to study Sophia's face. "Though you look tired. Are you sleeping enough, eating properly?" The questions were so maternal, so naturally concerned, that Sophia found herself answering honestly. "I've been working a lot of double shifts lately, and I lost my job this week, so things have been a little stressful." Isabella's expression darkened, and she shot a look at Dante that could have frozen wine. "You lost your job? When? Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" "It's not a big deal," Sophia said quickly, realizing she'd probably just gotten Dante in some kind of trouble. "These things happen in the restaurant business. I'll find something else." "It most certainly is a big deal." Isabella guided Sophia to the sofa and sat beside her, taking her hands in both of hers. "Tell me what happened." Sophia glanced at Dante, who nodded slightly, and found herself explaining about Rick's phone call, about his concerns regarding the wrong kind of attention. Isabella listened with the focused intensity of someone who was used to solving problems, and when Sophia finished, the older woman's eyes were flashing with something that looked like carefully controlled anger. "So my son's visit to your workplace cost you your livelihood," Isabella said. "That's unacceptable." "Mother," Dante began, but Isabella held up a hand that stopped him mid-sentence. "This girl risked her job to help a stranger, and when she served my son with the same kindness she'd show anyone, she was punished for it. That is not how decent people treat decent behaviour." Sophia found herself caught between embarrassment and gratitude. She wasn't used to having anyone fight her battles for her, especially not someone she'd met exactly once. But there was something about Isabella's indignation on her behalf that made her chest tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. "Mrs. Romano, really, it's okay. I'll figure something out." "You shouldn't have to figure it out. You should be rewarded, not punished." Isabella turned to Dante with the expression of someone who was about to issue orders. "We're going to fix this." "How do you suggest we do that?" Dante asked, though Sophia noticed he didn't argue with the premise that they should fix it. "She needs a job. We need someone we can trust. The solution seems obvious to me." Sophia looked between them, feeling like she was watching a conversation in code. "What kind of job?" Isabella smiled, and Sophia could see where Dante had gotten his ability to make people feel like the most important person in the room. "I host a great deal of entertaining here. Business dinners, family gatherings, charitable events. I've been looking for someone to help coordinate these occasions. Someone with service experience who understands how to make guests feel welcome and comfortable." "Like an event planner?" More personal than that, someone who would work directly with me, help me manage the household staff during events, make sure everything runs smoothly. Someone I could trust to understand that discretion is just as important as competence. Sophia felt her heart rate accelerate. This wasn't just a job offer, it was a lifeline. The kind of position that could solve all her financial problems and probably pay better than anything she'd ever dreamed of finding. It was also clearly a way for the Romano family to keep her close, to make sure she was taken care of in a way that created obligations she didn't fully understand yet. "That's very generous," she said carefully, "but I don't have any formal training in event planning or—" "You have something better than training," Isabella interrupted. "You have instincts. You knew how to help someone in crisis without being asked. You knew how to make my son feel welcome in a place where he clearly didn't belong. Those aren't skills you can learn from books." Sophia looked at Dante, trying to read his expression. He was watching the conversation with the same intensity he'd brought to observing her at the diner, like he was cataloguing every word and facial expression for later analysis. "What do you think?" she asked him directly. "I think," Dante said slowly, "that my mother is an excellent judge of character, and I think you'd be good at taking care of people, which is what this job really is." There was something in his tone that suggested layers beneath the surface, implications about what taking care of people might mean in the Romano household. But looking around the beautiful room, thinking about the eviction notice crumpled in her apartment and the medical bills that kept coming no matter how many extra shifts she worked, Sophia found it hard to care about implications. "When would I start?" she heard herself asking. "Tomorrow," Isabella said immediately. "If you're willing. I'm hosting a dinner party Thursday evening. Nothing too elaborate, just 12 people, and I could use the help." "What about references? Background checks? Don't you need to—" "My dear," Isabella said gently, "you gave me the best possible reference when you stopped to help a stranger on a rainy sidewalk. Everything else is just paperwork." Sophia nodded slowly, feeling like she was signing a contract written in a language she didn't quite speak. But the alternative was unemployment and homelessness, and watching everything she tried to build collapse around her. "I accept," she said, "and thank you, both of you. I won't let you down." Isabella squeezed her hands. "I know you won't. Now, let's discuss the details over dinner. Maria has prepared something special, and I want to hear all about your background so I know how to best utilize your talents." As they moved toward the dining room, Sophia caught a glimpse of herself in one of the antique mirrors that lined the hallway. The woman looking back at her was still wearing a second-hand dress and shoes that didn't quite fit, but there was something different in her posture, something that looked almost like hope. She was about to discover that in the Romano household, hope was a luxury that came with a very specific price tag, and like everything else in Dante's world, the bill would eventually come due. 3 days into her new position, Sophia was beginning to understand that taking care of the Romano family meant more than coordinating dinner parties and managing household staff. It meant learning to read the spaces between words, to interpret the meaning behind Isabella's careful silences, and to recognize when the elegant woman who'd hired her was quietly struggling to breathe. Sophia found Isabella in the sunroom at 7 in the morning, sitting motionless in her favourite chair, with one hand pressed to her chest and her face the colour of winter sky. The morning light streaming through the French windows made her look ethereal, almost translucent, like she might disappear if someone spoke too loudly. "Mrs. Romano?" Sophia set down the tea service she'd been carrying and crossed the room in 3 quick steps. "Are you all right?" Isabella's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Sophia with effort. "Just a little dizzy, dear. It will pass." But Sophia had spent enough time in hospital waiting rooms during her sister's worst episodes to recognise the signs of something more serious than dizziness. Isabella's breathing was shallow and irregular, her pulse visible in the delicate skin at her throat. When Sophia knelt beside her chair and took her wrist, the older woman's skin felt cold and slightly damp. "How long has this been going on?" Sophia asked, her voice steady, despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. "Since about 5 this morning. I didn't want to wake anyone." Sophia bit back her first response, which was that Isabella's health was worth waking every person in Chicago if necessary. Instead, she said, "I'm calling Dante." "No, don't disturb him. He has meetings all morning." "With respect, Mrs. Romano, those meetings can wait." Sophia was already reaching for her phone, grateful that Dante had insisted on giving her his direct number on her first day. "This is more important." He answered on the first ring, his voice immediately alert despite the early hour. "Sophia, what's wrong?" "It's your mother. She's having chest pains and difficulty breathing. How quickly can you get here?" 5 minutes. Call Dr. Reyes and tell him to drop everything. His number is programmed into the house phone under Doctor. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Sophia found the house phone and located Dr. Reyes's number, explaining the situation with the calm efficiency she'd learned from years of managing emergencies on minimum wage. Then she returned to Isabella, who was attempting to protest that all this fuss was unnecessary. "The doctor is coming," Sophia said, pulling a cashmere throw from the nearby sofa and tucking it around Isabella's shoulders. "Dante will be here in a few minutes." "You called my son away from his business for an old woman's heart palpitations?" "I called your son because someone he loves needs him, and that's more important than any business." Sophia sat on the ottoman beside Isabella's chair, close enough to monitor her breathing, but far enough to give her space. "Besides, if something happened to you and I didn't call him immediately, he'd probably have me thrown in the Chicago River." Isabella laughed softly, and some of the colour returned to her cheeks. "He wouldn't throw you in the river, dear. He'd have someone else do it. Much more civilized." The joke was delivered with such gentle humour that it took Sophia a moment to process that Isabella might not actually be joking. But before she could respond, she heard the front door slam and rapid footsteps crossing the marble entrance hall. Dante appeared in the sunroom doorway like a force of nature. His usual composure cracked just enough to reveal the fear underneath. He was still wearing his suit from whatever meeting he'd abandoned, but his hair was dishevelled and there was something almost wild in his dark eyes. "How is she?" he asked Sophia, though his gaze was fixed on his mother. "Stable. Chest pains started around 5. Breathing is shallow but regular. Dr. Reyes is on his way." Dante nodded, crossing to his mother's other side and kneeling beside her chair. When he took her hand, Sophia noticed that his fingers were trembling slightly. "Mama, what happened? Did you take your medication this morning?" "Of course I did. Don't fuss, Dante. It's just a little episode." "It's not just anything." His voice was rougher than Sophia had ever heard it, stripped of its usual careful control. "You scared the hell out of me." Isabella reached up with her free hand to touch her son's face, and Sophia felt like she was witnessing something intensely private. The vulnerable boy hidden beneath the dangerous man, the mother's love that was stronger than any empire he'd built. "I'm sorry," Isabella said softly. "I didn't mean to frighten you." "Don't apologize for being sick. Just promise me you'll call when something like this happens. Day or night, meeting or no meeting, nothing is more important than you." Sophia found herself looking away, giving them a moment of privacy while she busied herself with adjusting the throw around Isabella's legs. But she couldn't help noticing the way Dante's hands shook as he smoothed his mother's hair back from her forehead, the careful tenderness in movements that she suspected were capable of terrible violence. Dr. Reyes arrived 15 minutes later, a compact man in his 60s who moved with the confident efficiency of someone who'd been treating Romano family emergencies for decades. He examined Isabella thoroughly, while Dante paced the sunroom like a caged predator, and Sophia hovered nearby, ready to help with whatever was needed. "Atrial fibrillation," Dr. Reyes announced finally. "Her heart rhythm is irregular, but it's not immediately life-threatening. However, she needs to start taking an additional medication, and I want her monitored more closely." "What does that mean, more closely?" Dante asked. "Ideally, someone should check on her every few hours during the day, monitor her symptoms, make sure she's taking her medications on schedule, watch for signs of distress." Sophia saw Dante's jaw tighten. I can rearrange my schedule. No, you can't, Isabella interrupted firmly. You have responsibilities, Dante. The business won't run itself. The business can go to hell if... I'll do it. Both Dante and Isabella turned to look at Sophia, who was surprised to hear her own voice cutting through their argument. I'm here anyway, she continued, feeling suddenly self-conscious under their combined attention. Managing your mother's schedule is part of event coordination, right? Making sure she's healthy enough to host dinners and attend functions? Sophia, that's very kind, but you weren't hired to be a medical aid, Isabella said gently. I wasn't hired to do any one specific thing. I was hired to take care of what needed taking care of. Sophia looked between them, seeing the worry in Dante's eyes and the stubborn independence in Isabella's. Besides, I have some experience with this. My foster sister had a heart condition. I know what to watch for. Dante studied her face with the same intensity he'd brought to their first conversation at the diner. You'd be willing to do that? Stay close to the house? Check on her throughout the day? Of course, if Mrs. Romano is comfortable with the arrangement. Isabella reached for Sophia's hand, squeezing her fingers with surprising strength. My dear, I would be more than comfortable. I would be grateful. Doctor. Reyes nodded approvingly. Excellent. I'll leave detailed instructions for what to watch for, and I want to be called immediately if there are any changes. Mrs. Romano, you need to rest today. No events, no entertaining, no arguing with my orders. After the doctor left, the sunroom settled into a comfortable quiet. Isabella dozed in her chair, her breathing steady and her colour improved. Dante sat across from Sophia, his composure gradually returning as he watched his mother sleep. Thank you, he said quietly, for calling me, for staying calm, for offering to help with her care. You don't need to thank me for doing what anyone would do. That's where you're wrong. Dante's voice carried a weight that suggested years of experience with people who wouldn't do what anyone should do. Most people would have called 911 and walked away. You called the person who needed to know most. Sophia thought about that, about the automatic way she'd reached for her phone to call Dante instead of emergency services, about how natural it had felt to position herself as the bridge between his mother's crisis and his need to know about it. She's important to you, she said simply. She's everything to me. She's the only family I have left, and she's the only person in my life who knew me before I became... He gestured vaguely at himself, at the expensive suit and the phone that never stopped ringing, and the weight of whatever empire he carried on his shoulders. Before you became what? Dante was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his mother's sleeping form. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft Sophia had to lean forward to hear him. Someone who solves problems by making other problems disappear. The words hung in the air between them, and Sophia felt something shift in her understanding of the man sitting across from her. She'd known he was dangerous. That much was obvious from the way people reacted to his presence. But this was the first time he'd acknowledged it directly, the first time he'd let her see the cost of whatever he'd become. "And what were you before?" she asked. Dante smiled, and for just a moment he looked like someone who might have been her age once, someone who might have had dreams that didn't require enforcing them with violence. A son who wanted to make his mother proud. Isabella stirred in her sleep, and they both fell silent, watching over her like guards protecting something precious. Outside, Chicago went about its business of ambition and betrayal, but inside the sunroom there was only the sound of steady breathing and the weight of trust being carefully constructed between three people who were learning that family wasn't always about blood. Sophia realized she was no longer just an employee in the Romano household. She was becoming something far more dangerous and valuable, someone who belonged. The man watching the Romano estate from across the street had been there for 3 days, and Sophia was the only one who'd noticed. He was good at being invisible. She had to give him credit for that. He changed his position every few hours, cycling between the bus stop, the coffee shop, and the newspaper stand like someone with legitimate business in the neighbourhood. But Sophia had spent 10 years being invisible herself, and she recognised the careful choreography of someone trying not to be seen. She first spotted him on Tuesday morning while checking the perimeter cameras from Isabella's office. The monitors showed feeds from 12 different angles around the property, and Sophia had made it her habit to scan them every few hours as part of her expanded duties. Most of the time she saw joggers, dog walkers, and the occasional delivery truck, but this man appeared in too many shots, lingered too long, and never seemed to actually buy anything from the coffee shop where he spent so much time. By Thursday, she was certain he wasn't just a curious neighbour. The Romano household was preparing for Isabella's dinner party, the first event Sophia would coordinate from start to finish. 12 guests, 5 courses, and a guest list that read like a who's who of Chicago's most powerful families. Isabella had insisted on moving forward with the evening despite her recent health scare, claiming that cancelling would signal weakness to people who were always watching for signs of Romano vulnerability. Sophia was in the kitchen reviewing the final menu with Maria when she heard voices from the study, Dante's voice, along with 2 others she didn't recognise. The tone was tense, businesslike, with an undercurrent of barely controlled anger that made her instincts prickle. "The Torino family is getting bold," one of the unfamiliar voices was saying. 3 of our trucks got stopped for routine inspections this week. Merchandise seized, drivers detained, that's not coincidence. "Marco's testing our reactions," Dante replied, his voice carrying the kind of cold calculation that Sophia had learned to associate with his most dangerous moods. "He wants to see how far he can push before we push back." "Maybe it's time we showed him," the second voice suggested. "Send a message he can't ignore." "Not yet. We don't start wars over truck inspections, but we prepare for them." Sophia found herself frozen in place, holding a wine glass she'd been about to polish while listening to a conversation about truck seizures and messages and wars. She'd known that Dante's business involved activities that existed in legal grey areas, but hearing him discuss strategy for what sounded like an escalating conflict made the danger feel suddenly real. "What about security for tonight?" the first voice asked. "Mrs. Romano insists on going ahead with the dinner party, but with Torino making moves—" "Security will be triple what we normally have for family events," Dante said, "but it stays invisible. My mother won't have her guests feeling like they're dining in a war zone." Sophia set down the wineglass carefully, her mind racing. The man across the street, the increased tension in the household, the conversation about someone named Marco Torino testing their reactions. The pieces were forming a picture she didn't like. She waited until the voices in the study faded and the front door opened and closed, signalling that Dante's visitors had left. Then she found him in his office, standing behind his desk with his phone pressed to his ear, giving someone instructions about perimeter sweeps and rotating patrols. When he ended the call, he looked up to find Sophia in the doorway. "Everything ready for tonight?" he asked, his tone shifting back to the careful courtesy he usually used with her. "Almost, but I need to tell you something." Sophia stepped into the office and closed the door behind her, a gesture that raised his eyebrows. "There's been someone watching the house 3 days now." Dante's entire demeanour changed in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The polite family friend disappeared, replaced by someone who looked like he could kill with his bare hands and sleep soundly afterward. "Where?" Sophia described the man's positions, his timing, his too casual surveillance routine. Dante listened without interrupting, his dark eyes growing colder with every detail. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I wasn't sure at first. I wanted to be certain before I worried you with maybes. In this house, maybes can get people killed." His voice was harsh enough to make her flinch. "If you see anything unusual, anything at all, you tell me immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes." Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassed by the reprimand, but also frightened by the implications. "Do you think it's connected to whatever's happening with the Torino family?" Dante studied her face carefully. "You heard the meeting?" It wasn't a question, and Sophia didn't try to deny it. Some of it. Enough to know that someone's causing problems for your business. Enough to know that tonight might be more complicated than a simple dinner party. Sophia thought about Isabella upstairs, resting before the evening's festivities, excited about playing hostess for the first time since her health scare. She thought about the guest list full of powerful families, people who probably had enemies of their own. She thought about Maria and the catering staff who would be moving in and out of the house all evening. "Should we cancel?" she asked. "My mother would never forgive me. Besides, cancelling would send exactly the message we don't want to send, that the Romano family can be intimidated into hiding." "Then what do we do?" Dante was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Sophia and the window that looked out over the estate grounds. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than it had been a moment before. "We proceed as planned. The extra security will handle any external threats, but I need you to do something for me." "What?" "I need you to be my eyes and ears inside the house tonight. Watch the staff, watch the guests, watch for anything that feels wrong. You see things other people miss. You proved that by spotting our watcher. I need that skill tonight." Sophia felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You think the threat might come from inside, from the guests?" "In my experience, the most dangerous enemies are the ones who smile at you over dinner." The words hung in the air between them like a verdict. Sophia realised she was being asked to do more than coordinate a dinner party. She was being asked to help protect the Romano family from threats that might come from their own social circle. "Dante," she said carefully, "I need to know what I'm watching for. If I'm going to help keep your family safe, I need to understand what I'm protecting them from." He was quiet for so long that Sophia thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years and choices that couldn't be undone. "Marco Torino wants what my family has built. Our territory, our connections, our reputation. He's been chipping away at our operations for months, testing our defences, looking for weaknesses. Tonight's dinner includes people who do business with both families. If Marco wanted to send a message or gather intelligence, this would be the perfect opportunity." "And you think he might have turned one of your guests?" "I think desperate men do desperate things, and I think the only way to survive in this business is to assume that everyone has a price until they prove otherwise." Sophia thought about Isabella's comment from her first day, that Sophia had given the best possible reference by helping a stranger. Now she understood why that mattered so much in this world, because genuine loyalty was apparently rarer than diamonds. "What happens if I see something wrong?" "You find me immediately. You don't confront anyone. You don't try to handle it yourself. You come to me and I handle it." "And if you're not available?" Dante opened his desk drawer and pulled out something small and black. "Then you use this." Sophia stared at the panic button he'd placed on the desk between them. It was sleek and modern, about the size of a car key fob, with a single red button that seemed to pulse in the office lighting. "Press this, and every security person on the property will know there's a threat. But Sophia—" Dante's eyes locked with hers. "Only use this if someone's life is in immediate danger. Once you press that button, there's no going back. Do you understand?" Sophia picked up the device, surprised by how heavy something so small could feel. "I understand." "Good. Now, let's make sure this dinner party is memorable for all the right reasons." As Sophia left his office with the panic button burning like a coal in her pocket, she realised that her job description had just expanded again. She was no longer just an event coordinator or even a caregiver. She was becoming a guardian. And in the Romano family, that was a position that required being willing to do whatever it took to protect the people you loved, even if it meant crossing lines you never thought you'd have to cross. Isabella found Sophia in the conservatory after midnight, long after the dinner party guests had departed and the house had settled into its usual elegant silence. Sophia was sitting on the window seat, still wearing her black dress from the evening, staring out at the moonlit gardens with the 1,000-yard stare of someone processing too much new information at once. "You did beautifully tonight, dear," Isabella said, settling beside her with the careful movements of someone whose heart wasn't entirely reliable. "The dinner was flawless. Even Vincent Castellano complimented the wine selection, and that man hasn't said anything positive about anyone in 30 years. Sophia managed a small smile. "Thank you, though I'm not sure how much of that was my doing versus Maria's experience and your planning. Don't diminish your contribution. You have a gift for reading people, for knowing what they need before they ask for it. I watched you tonight, the way you anticipated Mr. D'Angelo's dietary restrictions, the way you redirected conversation when the Morettis started arguing about their son's wedding plans. Those aren't skills you can teach." Sophia was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the condensation that had formed on the window. The dinner had gone smoothly, too smoothly perhaps. No suspicious behaviour from the guests, no signs of surveillance or sabotage, no reasons to reach for the panic button that had felt like a loaded weapon in her pocket all evening. "Mrs. Romano," she said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. How did you do it? When you were young, when you first became part of this family, how did you learn to live with the constant danger?" Isabella was quiet for so long that Sophia wondered if she'd overstepped. When the older woman finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of 40 years' worth of carefully buried fears. "I suppose I should start by telling you that I wasn't born into this world," Isabella said. "I was like you, in many ways, a young woman trying to make her way in Chicago, working at a dress shop downtown, living in a studio apartment that was barely bigger than a closet." Sophia turned to look at her, surprised. In the elegant conservatory, with its imported marble and crystal chandeliers, it was hard to imagine Isabella as anything other than the sophisticated matriarch she'd always known her to be. "You met Mr. Romano at the dress shop?" "I met Antonio at a coffee shop 3 blocks from where I worked. He was different from other men I'd known, intense, intelligent, and completely focused on me, in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. I had no idea who he was, what his family did. I thought he was just a successful businessman with an unusual interest in my opinions about everything from politics to poetry." Isabella smiled at the memory, her eyes growing distant. "He courted me for 3 months before he told me the truth. 3 months of flowers and dinners and long walks through Lincoln Park, where he'd ask me about my dreams and actually listen to the answers. I was completely in love with him by the time he explained what loving him would cost." "What did he tell you?" "That his family business involved activities that existed outside the law, that there would always be people who wanted to hurt him, and by extension, anyone he cared about, that if I chose to be with him, I would be choosing a life of beautiful cages, protected but never entirely free, wealthy but always watched, loved but constantly in danger." Sophia felt something twist in her chest, recognizing parallels she hadn't expected to find. "What did you do?" "I told him I needed time to think, a week to decide whether I could live with the knowledge of what he was, and what that would make me." Isabella's voice grew softer. "I spent that week walking through the same neighbourhoods where we'd had our first dates, trying to imagine my life without him in it, trying to convince myself that I could go back to selling dresses and eating dinner alone and pretending I'd never met a man who looked at me like I was the most fascinating person in the world. But you couldn't. I discovered something about myself that week, something that perhaps I should have been ashamed of, but wasn't. I realised that I'd rather live dangerously with someone I loved than safely with someone I didn't. So I went to him and said yes, knowing full well what I was accepting." Sophia stared out at the gardens, thinking about her own journey from the diner to this window seat, from serving coffee to coordinating dinner parties for people who discuss territory disputes over dessert. "Do you ever regret it?" "Every time someone I love is threatened, yes. Every time Dante comes home with blood on his knuckles, every time I read about violence in the newspapers and wonder if my family was involved. Yes, I regret the choice that put people I care about in harm's way." Isabella reached over and took Sophia's hand. "But I've never regretted loving them, even knowing the cost." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two women separated by 40 years and countless experiences, but connected by the same fundamental choice, whether to run toward love or away from danger. "Why are you telling me this?" Sophia asked finally. "Because I recognize the look in your eyes, the same look I had in the mirror 40 years ago, the look of someone trying to decide whether she can live with what she's learned about the people she's starting to care about." Sophia felt her cheeks flush. "I don't know what you mean." "My dear," Isabella said gently, "I've been watching my son for 34 years. I know what he looks like when he's falling in love, and I know what you look like when you're fighting the same battle." The words hung in the air like an accusation, impossible to deny, even though Sophia wasn't ready to acknowledge their truth. She thought about the way Dante had trusted her with his mother's care, the way he'd shared his fears about Isabella's health, the way he'd given her a panic button and asked her to be his eyes and ears. "It's not that simple," she said quietly. "Love never is. But the question isn't whether it's simple. The question is whether it's worth it." Sophia thought about Dante's hands shaking as he'd smoothed his mother's hair during her health scare, about the way he'd looked when he'd told her that most people solve problems by making other problems disappear, about the careful distance he maintained from everyone except the two women in his life who'd somehow earned the right to see him without his armour. "He's dangerous," she said, testing the words. "Yes, the things he does, they hurt people. Yes, he could go to prison, he could be killed, anyone close to him could be killed. Yes." Isabella's voice was steady, matter of fact. "All of that is true. And if you choose to love him anyway, you'll spend the rest of your life living with those possibilities. How do you stand it? The same way you stood helping a stranger on a rainy sidewalk when you knew it might cost you your job. The same way you've taken care of me when you knew it meant accepting a panic button and learning to spot surveillance. You do what feels right, and you trust that the person you're protecting is worth the risk." Sophia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the choice that was crystallizing in front of her. She could walk away, take the money she'd earned, find a normal job, build a safe life with safe people who would never ask her to watch for enemies at dinner parties. Or she could stay, knowing that staying meant accepting a world where love and danger were inseparable, where protecting the people you cared about might require becoming someone you'd never planned to be. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good," Isabella said firmly. "Fear keeps you careful, and careful keeps you alive. But don't let fear make your decisions for you. Let your heart make them, and then let your brain figure out how to make them work." Sophia opened her eyes and looked at Isabella, this elegant, intelligent woman who'd chosen love over safety 40 years ago and had somehow managed to build a life that was both beautiful and dangerous. "If I stay," Sophia said slowly, "if I choose this, what does that make me?" Isabella smiled, and in that smile Sophia could see the young woman who'd walked away from dress shops and studio apartments for the promise of a love that was worth any risk. "It makes you family," Isabella said, "and in this house, family is the only thing that matters more than survival." Outside the conservatory windows, Chicago glittered in the darkness, full of people making their own choices about love and safety and the prices they were willing to pay for both. Inside, Sophia Moretti sat with the knowledge that her old life was ending and her new one, whatever that meant, was about to begin. The only question left was whether she had the courage to choose transformation over security. Looking at Isabella's face, thinking about Dante's trust and the way he'd looked at her like she was someone worth protecting, Sophia realized the answer was already written in her heart. She just had to find the strength to read it. The Ferranti Hotel ballroom had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale, all crystal chandeliers and white roses and candlelight that made even Chicago's most dangerous men look like gentlemen. It was the perfect setting for the Romano family's annual memorial dinner honouring Dante's father, a tradition that brought together every major family in the city for one evening of carefully choreographed civility. Sophia stood at the edge of the ballroom, wearing a midnight blue dress that Isabella had insisted on buying for her, watching the careful choreography of power and respect that governed these gatherings. She'd spent 2 weeks coordinating every detail of this evening, from the seating arrangements that had to account for decades-old grudges to the security protocols that would keep 50 armed and dangerous men from turning a memorial dinner into a massacre. But tonight felt different from the moment they'd arrived. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with the usual territorial posturing, and Sophia could see it in the way conversation stopped when certain people entered the room, in the way bodyguards positioned themselves with more care than usual. "Beautiful work, as always," Vincent Castellano appeared beside her, his voice carrying the warmth of genuine admiration. "Your attention to detail is remarkable, Sophia. The flower arrangements alone must have taken days to coordinate." "Thank you, Mr. Castellano. Mrs. Romano wanted everything to honour her husband's memory properly." Antonio would have approved. He always said that respect should be visible, not just felt. Vincent's eyes scanned the room with the practiced assessment of someone who'd survived 40 years in a business where paranoia was a survival skill. "Though I notice you've been watching the room like you're expecting trouble." Sophia glanced at him sharply. Vincent was one of the few men in this world who'd always treated her with kindness rather than suspicious curiosity, but he was also observant enough to notice when something was wrong. "Just making sure everything runs smoothly," she said carefully. Vincent's smile was knowing. "In my experience, when a young woman with your instincts starts looking nervous at a gathering like this, it's worth paying attention. What do you see that the rest of us might have missed?" Sophia hesitated, uncertain whether sharing her concerns would be helpful or dangerous. But Vincent had been Antonio Romano's closest friend, and Isabella trusted him completely. If something was wrong, he needed to know. "The catering staff," she said quietly. "I vetted everyone personally, but there are 3 men working the service tonight that I don't recognise. They're not from any of our usual vendors." Vincent's expression sharpened. "Show me." Sophia discreetly pointed out the 3 servers she'd been tracking, men who moved through the room with the kind of awareness that suggested military or law enforcement training, who kept their eyes on the guests rather than their tasks, who seemed more interested in mapping the room's layout than actually serving dinner. "Marco Torino's people," Vincent said after a moment, his voice flat with certainty. "I recognise one of them from a restaurant in Little Italy, place that's been laundering money for the Torino family for years." Sophia felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What do we do?" "We tell Dante, and we do it without causing a panic." Vincent's hand moved casually to his jacket pocket, a gesture that Sophia realised was him checking for his weapon. "Can you get to him without looking obvious about it?" Sophia scanned the room until she located Dante near the head table, engaged in conversation with 2 older men she recognised as heads of allied families. He was too far away, and there were too many people between them for her to reach him quickly without drawing attention. "Not easily. He's surrounded." "Then we improvise." Vincent smiled, but there was nothing warm about it anymore. "Follow my lead, and whatever happens, stay close to the exits." Before Sophia could ask what he meant, Vincent was moving across the ballroom with the confident stride of someone who belonged everywhere he went. Sophia followed, her heart pounding as she tried to maintain the composure of someone simply checking on dinner arrangements rather than someone who just identified enemy agents in the middle of a memorial service. They were halfway across the room when Sophia saw one of the suspicious servers reach inside his jacket. Time slowed to the consistency of honey. Sophia could see the man's hand emerging with something that definitely wasn't a notepad or serving utensil. She could see Vincent realise what was happening, his own hand moving toward his weapon. She could see Dante, still engaged in conversation, completely unaware that someone was drawing a gun 20 feet behind him. Sophia didn't think. Thinking was a luxury she couldn't afford. She grabbed the nearest wine bottle from a serving station and hurled it across the room with all the strength her waitressing years had given her. The bottle caught the gunman square in the temple with a sound like breaking thunder, dropping him instantly. The crash of shattering glass and his falling body sent the entire ballroom into chaos. "Gun!" Vincent's voice cut through the confusion like a blade. "Everyone down!" The ballroom erupted into controlled pandemonium. Bodyguards drew weapons, family heads dove for cover, and the careful choreography of the memorial dinner transformed into the deadly ballet of a firefight. Sophia found herself pressed against the wall beside an overturned table, watching Vincent and several other men engage the remaining infiltrators with the precise efficiency of soldiers who'd done this dance before. Through the chaos, she saw Dante across the room, his own weapon drawn, barking orders that were somehow audible over the gunfire. His eyes found hers across the confusion, and even at a distance she could see the mixture of relief and fury in his expression. The shooting lasted less than 3 minutes. When the silence finally settled over the ballroom, it was broken only by the sound of sirens in the distance, and Isabella's voice, calm and authoritative, directing the cleanup with the efficiency of someone who'd managed crisis situations before. Sophia remained pressed against the wall, adrenaline coursing through her system like electricity, until Dante appeared beside her. His hands were gentle as he helped her to her feet, but she could feel the tremor in his fingers that spoke to how badly she'd frightened him. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rougher than she'd ever heard it. No, shaken up but not hurt. "You threw that bottle." It wasn't a question. "He was going to shoot you. I couldn't just watch." Dante stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable moving across his face. Then his hands cupped her cheeks, and he kissed her with the desperate intensity of someone who'd just realized how close he'd come to losing something irreplaceable. The kiss lasted only seconds before he pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, while chaos continued to swirl around them. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "You would have done the same for me." "That's different. I chose this world. You didn't sign up for shootouts at memorial dinners." Sophia looked around the ballroom, at the overturned tables and broken glass, at the men in expensive suits checking weapons and coordinating with law enforcement contacts, who would ensure this incident never made the newspapers. This was Dante's reality, the world she'd been slowly accepting, piece by piece over the past months. "Maybe I did sign up for it," she said. "Maybe I've been signing up for it every day I chose to stay." Dante's hands were still framing her face, his dark eyes searching hers for something she wasn't sure she knew how to give him. "Sophia, after tonight, after what just happened, if you want to walk away, I'll understand. I'll make sure you're taken care of, that you're safe, but I won't ask you to—" "Stop." Sophia placed her hands over his, holding them against her cheeks. "Just stop. I'm not going anywhere. You could have been killed tonight. So could you. So could your mother, so could Vincent, so could any of the people in this room that I've come to care about. That's the reality, isn't it? This is what loving your family means." Dante's eyes widened slightly at her use of the word loving, and Sophia realized she'd just crossed a line she hadn't meant to cross yet, but looking at him in the aftermath of violence, seeing the relief and fear and something deeper in his expression, she found she didn't want to take it back. "Is that what you're doing?" he asked softly. "Loving my family?" Sophia thought about Isabella's late-night conversation in the conservatory, about Vincent's immediate trust in her instincts, about the way she'd thrown herself between danger and the people who mattered to her without hesitation. "Yes," she said simply, "I think that's exactly what I'm doing." Dante's smile was slow and devastating, transforming his entire face from the dangerous man who'd just survived an assassination attempt to someone who looked almost young. "Then I guess," he said, pulling her closer, as the ballroom continued its organized chaos around them, "we should probably talk about what that means." Sophia nodded, her heart pounding with something that had nothing to do with the adrenaline of gunfights and everything to do with the way Dante Romano was looking at her like she was the answer to questions he'd been afraid to ask. But first, they had a crime scene to clean up and a family to protect. After all, that's what family did.